Just making a quick video, a follow-up, talking about heat. You kind of need that in the winter, don't you? And you might think it's a good idea to use your power station, you know, your brand new power station. It's why you bought it, right? It's why you bought it, for emergency power. You might think, well, you know, if the power's out and it's cold, you might be thinking it might be a good idea to try plugging in your space heater, right? Well, you're going to find out real quick that that's not a good idea. And this is, you know, a bit unnecessary, but we'll demonstrate this. We will actually power this thing on. And yes, the Delta 2 does have an 1800 watt inverter, so it's not going to be any problem. Now this model defaults to low, which is a good idea. It's a good idea. It doesn't go all the way up to the 1500 watts right away. Let's see what we're pulling. Okay, we're still pulling 1000 watts. But the key thing to look at here is, and yeah, the battery's only about half full, but still, the key thing to look at here is 26 minutes. Look at 28 minutes. 30, let's say 30 minutes on half a battery. That's an hour on the full battery, right? If you're lucky, let's be honest. If you're lucky. And then what? Then what are you going to do? Now, this heat feels amazing too, by the way. So as I talked about in my original video, you know, about using these power stations for heat, you know, you can do this. You can do this for like a couple of minutes, sure. You know, if you're getting dressed or something, right? Something where you're not going to be able to, you know, cuddle up under a blanket. You know, obviously, if you're getting dressed, you can't do that. You can use these things for a couple of minutes at a time, and like I said, this feels incredible right now. It's freezing out, right? And this would really make the difference. You won't dread, you know, getting out of bed, getting out from under the blanket, and you know, whatever you got to do. You're not going to dread doing that if you can have a heater like this running. And so, yeah, you know, you quickly realize that as great as the heat felt, you know, power stations, it's going to die. It's going to die in no time, right? So you got to come up with some other solution to stay warm over a long period of time. And that's where you want to get yourself a heated blanket. A heated blanket is by far the most efficient way to stay warm, you know, with electricity, with electric power from a power station. Now, the one thing that you don't necessarily want to do, though, is you don't want to plug in, you know, an electric blanket that doesn't use much power into a large power station like this with an 1800 watt inverter, right? Because the bigger the inverter, the more power the inverter is going to consume itself, regardless of what it's powering. And especially with an electric blanket, it's kind of like the same story as like a full-size refrigerator, where it's not even drawing power constantly. You know, so if you're using this thing for, let's say, 10 hours, it might only be drawing power 5 hours out of that 10 hours, right? And so you really have a lot of waste, you know, if you're using a large inverter, because the inverter is going to be on that entire time, right? It has to be. So what you want to do, you know, what you want to do is you want to get yourself a small power station, like this old Jackery. This thing's fantastic because it's only got a 200 watt inverter. And yes, it's pure sine wave. Of course, you always want pure sine wave. And so what that means is that the inverter itself is not going to use much power at all. And let's see what we're at. We're at 42% on this thing. And if we plug in this heated blanket, we'll just plug this thing in right quick. And yeah, let's just power it on. Got the little thing over here. Power this thing on. And let's turn it on high too, by the way. We'll turn this thing on high. And we'll see that we're not even using that much power. What do we got? 62 watts versus 1000 watts with this thing on low, by the way, on low, right? So you can see the difference. And as I mentioned, the best part is that this will actually cycle on and off. So probably about half the time you're using this heated blanket, this thing will actually be drawing 0 watts. Now, as I mentioned, the inverter will always be on, but with this being a small inverter, it's only using a few watts itself, right? Whereas the inverter on this Delta 2 I know uses like between 10 and 15 watts. Okay, so now you got the ideal setup. You're using a small power station with a small inverter to power your heated blanket. The next thing you want to do to really optimize this setup and make it as efficient as possible is you want to grab a regular blanket. Yes, that's right. You grab a regular blanket and you put that over the heated blanket. And obviously the more the better. And you know, obviously you're going to be under all of this as well. So what basically happens here is you use the regular blanket to keep the heated blanket warm. Because all heated blankets have, you know, that's why this thing has like different heat settings. They all have like a little temperature sensor in the blanket. So it knows how much power, it knows the temperature, right? And it knows how much power it's got to use to kind of keep the blanket at that temperature. Well, if you can keep the heated blanket warm, you keep the blanket warm itself, basically it's going to use less power. Okay, obviously the more blankets you can kind of pile on under there, the better. And so what will happen is, as I mentioned, this thing will cycle on and off. When you have a heated blanket under other blankets, keep it nice and warm, it's going to draw power, it's going to draw less power and just, you know, less power less often. And it will really extend your runtime here. In fact, look at that. Look at that. You saw that happen in real time. Dropped to 6 watts. And that's just basically the power that the inverter is using. So the blanket's not drawing any power right now. And look at that. That happened, and you saw that happen in real time.